Hello, welcome to the second session of Unit 1, which is basically the introduction to microeconomics. So, in this unit, I want to take you through the principles of economics as well as the economic modeling. In short, what I want to take you through here is the world of economics in general as well as the methods. So economics is in the brackets of it's covered in brackets we call the 10 principles. Now these 10 principles describe what goes on in the economy or what happens and what do people look at if they are trying to understand economics better, especially from the micro point of view. But we also have the part which is macro. So let's start our analysis or our session by first looking at the 10 principles that you should always know. So it's saying 10 principles of economics you should know. So always take note that whenever you are studying your economics, have the 10 principles at the back of your mind. Okay, so these principles are bordered in 3. So the first part looks at how people make decisions, and here we will have 4 principles that fall under decision made by people, and then the other one will show the interaction between people, and there we'll have 3 principles. The last set falls under the economy as a whole. So let's begin with how people make decisions. The first principle we have is that people face a trade-off in their decision making. Scarcity in relation to wants means you face trade-off. Therefore, you have to make a choice. Remember, we said you cannot have everything you want, and therefore you will be forced to make choices by this item or this term we call scarcity. The second principle looks at the opportunity cost. In our decision making, people, or in the way people make their decisions, they incur economic costs. Now, this is the cost of your choice which you make, and as such, you will have to give up something in order for you to obtain something. Therefore, the cost of the choice you make is what you give up for that item. In other words, the opportunity cost will involve the opportunity cost of you going to church, for example, as opposed when the movie is also available, will be the movie itself. So in making choices, we need to take this cost into consideration. The third principle has to deal with rationality. Rational people think at the margin. Now remember, we've looked at rationality and we've also looked at marginal concepts. This means we choose a little more or a little less of something. If you decide to go for a movie, you will have to give up going to church. Let's assume that we are looking at hours allocated. Suppose that the movie and going to church had equal hours allocated, say 3 hours each. If you decide to go for a movie just for 1 hour, it means you miss out church for 1 hour. If you add an additional hour, it means you'll have lost 2 of church service. So in economics, we choose a little more or a little less of something. Under how people make decisions, we have the last principle, which is the fourth principle, and this is the influence of incentives. The choices you make are influenced by the incentives. What are you going to gain if you decide to go for a movie? Or what are you going to gain if you decide to go to church? The incentives, if you evaluate them, you do your cost-benefit analysis, you will have proper information as to which decision or which choice you should take. Therefore, incentives play a key role in decision making. Let's turn to the interaction between people. So under how people interact, we have the first, the fifth, which we can continue as just indicate as the fifth principle of economics, the specialization and trade. Now, specialization and trade will improve the well-being of all participants in the economy. Nations specialize in producing an item which they are good at producing, or specialize in producing an item which they incur a lower cost if they produce it, and then export to other nations who are facing huge cost in producing that item. In exchange, the nation may decide to import a different item from the country which has produced it more efficiently. If this continues, or if this happens, it means the volumes of trade will improve. Therefore, specialization and trade will improve the well-being of all participants. If volumes of trade improve, it means nations, individuals in different nations will have a lot more of the items. Remember, more is preferred to less. The second principle is the effectiveness of the market. Now, in the market, we have the demand side and the supply side. Now, we have to decide, there are decisions made here in the, whether the market should be governed by the government or it should be free. In other words, a market can be a free market economy, or a market can fall in the command economy, or in the mixture of the command and the open market. In the words of Adam Smith, he looked at the market to be a free market economy, to be one where there is an invisible hand and people are behaving as though they are being led by the invisible hand. This means that if markets are not, if markets are to operate efficiently, they have to be left for the law of demand and supply to take their course, which means without the government, people in the market will be led by the invisible hand. If the market is not optimal, it necessitates that the government should intervene, and this means the invisible hand notion is muted. Then in this case, we can look at the role of the government. Governments can occasionally improve the coordinating function of the market, especially when the market is producing undesired results. For example, if there is, for example, in the case of COVID-19, people have been given the free will to wear the masks on their own. They've been told to stop. People have been advised to stop going to bars to drink. In other words, bars have been closed. Left to the people, it has been noted in most countries that people are convening in other areas where they're forming meetings for social interactions. Government has decided to deploy officers to go and dismantle such meetings. This is because left to the market has produced undesired results. Therefore, the action of people meeting secretly and in groups has necessitated for the government's action. The eighth principle, which falls in the on how economy, in the brackets of how economies make decisions as a whole, we first have the production and the standard of living. Now, different nations have different standards of living, and therefore there should be decisions on how much will be produced to cater for the people living in that nation. If the standards of living are low, it means even the production capacity is low. But when the standard of living goes up, then there is need to increase production to meet the growing demand in a given economy. Therefore, a rise in the standard of living requires a rise in the output of goods and services. Money and inflation is a ninth principle. If the monetary authority of a country annually print money in excess of the growth of output of goods and services, it will eventually lead to inflation. Now, when we have inflation, we're talking about the general rise in prices. If prices are the ones that are inflating the figures collected in revenue, then it means real output is not meeting the standard of the people, or is not improving the standards of living, because it will not lead to development. So inflation has key roles to play in the field of economics. Finally, we have inflation and employment trade-off. In the short run, society faces a short run trade-off between inflation and its level of unemployment. Now we will look at these three in more detail when we go to macroeconomics, which is ECF 110. In the meantime, we'll focus our discussion on how people make decisions and how people interact. The decisions of the economy as a whole are left for the macroeconomic course. Okay, so let's distinguish between microeconomics and macroeconomics. To start with, the word micro comes from the Greek word called micros, which means small. With this, microeconomics studies the behavior of individual households, individual firms, and individual governments. It studies how these individual units make decisions in the presence of scarcity. In other words, it studies how individual households, firms, and governments allocate scarce resources to meet the unlimited ones. On the other hand, macroeconomics comes from the Greek word called macros, which means large. Therefore, macroeconomics studies the behavior of the economy as a whole. In these units, we are looking at the study of inflation, the study of GDP, the study of unemployment. All these affect the entire economy. If you look at the study in the increase in the price of sugar, that becomes micro and therefore falls in the realms of microeconomics. Okay, further to this, we can also distinguish between positive economics and normative economics. With positive economics, it deals with what the economy is and not what the economy should be. In other words, we study what is and not what ought to be. Positive economics is concerned with the notions of what is the case and not what should be the case. If you are met with situations or statements that are moving with what ought to be, what should be, you should suspect some normativity in such statements, and therefore falls in the policy side of economics. Let's take an example. The examples of positive economics can take the following. If you look at the unemployment rate in Zambia and you say unemployment rate in Zambia is higher than that in Canada, this statement is positive. Other things equal, if tuition fee is substantially increased, then college or university enrollments will fall. This is positive. If you turn to the normative side, on the other hand, normative economics offers recommendations based on personal value judgments. And these value judgments identify problems and prescribe solutions. This simply means normative economics deals with the subjective nature of economics, subjective side of economics. It offers value, it puts value judgments to situations. Therefore, it is also called policy economics, which analyzes outcomes of economic behavior, evaluate those outcomes as good or bad, and may prescribe course of actions. What should be done given we have evaluated some situations? Put in simple terms, normative economics is subjective. For example, statements which are normative can take the following form. Zambia should undertake policies to reduce their unemployment rate. Now, this statement is subjective and has some value judgment based on what someone is feeling. Zambia should undertake policies to reduce their unemployment rate. Secondly, college and university tuition fees should be lowered so that more students can obtain an education. This is based on what someone is feeling. Therefore, it has some value judgment in it. This means that when you are studying economics, you should always distinguish between what is normative and what is positive. In other words, you should know what falls in the theoretical side and the policy side. Let's look at the methods that we use in economics, especially where we want to make some evaluations. So economics is also focused on the scientific methods of observations. Then you formulate the theories and go back to making more observations from the theories. This means that you have to devise theories, you collect the data, analyze that data in an attempt to verify or refute the theory. You cannot just look at something and then argue it out. You need to have facts around it and then do more observations. Looking into that critically, we can distinguish between theories and models, or rather we can look at theories and models in more details. Theories involve models, and these models involve variables. In simpler terms, a theory is the mother of the models and the variables. Therefore, a model is a formal statement of a theory. In other words, a model is an abstraction from reality. In the mode of economic models, models are abstract representation of economic reality. For example, if we are talking about the trade-off, the opportunity cost, we use the production possibility frontier to display what would happen if one individual wanted to produce more of one item and less of the other. So that production possibility frontier is a model. Economic theory involves building models of behavior. An economic theory is a general statement of cause and effect, action and reaction. In looking at the cause and effect, we need to develop a model. Now that model will consist of variables which we will observe directly. Therefore, a variable is a measure that can change from observation to observation. Given this, we need to understand some variables. As you move on in this course, you will have different models that you're going to formulate, and out of these you have to conduct some research with the models. Take a look at this model below. Let's say y is equal to a plus bx. So this is a model which states that there is a positive relationship between x and y. So x is a variable, y is a variable. A and b are constants. So given these models then, given these variables then, we have one model. And this model will take us to verifying a given theory around it. So it should be noted that a theory consists of models, and models consist of variables. Let's look at the key part of economics that involves making assumptions, and we use the term ceteris paribus. Now, the ceteris paribus device, the ceteris paribus term is part of the process of abstraction. We make this assumption to be able to see the linkage between variables. Holding other factors constant allows us to see the behavior of the active variables. For example, if I have an equation y is equal to a plus bx plus cz, if I want to see how x is related to y, I can hold z constant and then observe the behavior between the relationship between x and y. So holding this z constant is what we call the ceteris paribus. So if you are looking at this model, so you may assume ceteris paribus and just look at x and y behavior. Lastly to this theory is has something to do with the pitfalls that we should avoid in making decisions in economics. So these pitfalls, number one, includes the post hoc or ergo propter hoc fallacy, which refers to a common error made in thinking about causation. For example, if event A happens before event B, it is not necessarily true that A caused event B. Or put in other words, if for example, if you decide to go to church and on your way it starts to rain, it doesn't mean that you're going to church is the reason why it started raining. So we should always avoid making such an error or a problem, bringing such a problem into our economic modeling. The fact that one happens before the other does not mean that the first case is what caused the second to occur. The second pitfall that we should avoid is called the fallacy of composition. This is the enormous belief that what is true for a part is also true for the whole economy. It's a wrong belief. In other words, it's a wrong belief that because it has happened to an individual, then it is true for everybody who is in the economy. Or it's true for every group, every member of a given group. These two pitfalls must always be observed and always be avoided whenever we are making decisions. If something happens to an individual, it should be linked to that individual alone and not be brought to the whole group. Okay, so with this, I end my sessions. If you have questions, please send an email to muauelias@gmail.com. I'll see you in Unit 2, where we are going to continue with the introduction to economics. Bye-bye.